There is a ring of crushed eggshells around a plant in your garden right now. In 1953, a farm family saved every shell they had, and not one of them ever went near a slug. They saved them. That part is true, and it is where the story comes from. There was a tin on the back of the stove, and every shell went into it, and they went out to the garden by the bucketful. But they were not a fence, and nobody ever thought they were, and the job they were doing was a completely different one. Now go and look at your own ring, if you have one. Get down close in the morning and look for a slime trail crossing it. You will find one, like they go straight over the top and they do not slow down, and they have been doing that all season while you felt like you had done something. I am going to be straight with you because you have heard the eggshell thing from somebody you trust, and I do not enjoy taking it away. It has been tested more than once by people who set out to prove it, and it does not work. Slugs cross crushed shells without difficulty. So do coffee grounds, sand, sawdust, and most of the other sharp things people ring their plants with. And I am not here to tell you your grandfather was wrong. He was not. He knew exactly what to do about slugs, and it was not a barrier, and it took him about 4 minutes a day, and it worked better than anything you can buy. By the end of this, you will know why no sharp barrier stops a slug, and it is a matter of how the animal moves. You will know the one thing you are almost certainly doing in the evening that is making your slug problem worse. You will know the actual farm method, which is not a product and not a spray. And you will know the one slug remedy on the shelf that kills dogs, because it is still sold and people still lose animals to it every year. Stay with me, because the second part is the one that changes the garden. Here is the reframe. You cannot fence out a slug, you can only remove it. That sounds defeatist until you see why, and then it changes what you spend your time on. A slug does not walk, it glides on a layer of mucus that it lays down in front of itself, and that mucus is doing several jobs at once. It is a lubricant, it is an adhesive, and it is a cushion. The animal is essentially traveling on its own portable road, and it never puts bare tissue on the ground at all. So think about what a barrier of sharp material is supposed to do. It is supposed to cut or irritate the animal into turning around. But a slug crossing crushed shell is not being cut, because it is not touching the shell. It is laying mucus over the top of the whole thing and gliding across. Sharp is simply not a category that means much to an animal that carries its own surface with it. The famous test on this is a gardening magazine trial in Britain that put eggshells along with copper tape, wool pellets, grit, and several other barrier products up against the control of bare soil. Almost none of them showed a meaningful difference. Some of the plants ringed with barriers were eaten more than the ones with nothing at all. And there is a second problem with barriers that nobody mentions. Even if it worked, a ring of anything on the surface only stops slugs coming from outside the ring. Slugs are already in that soil. They are in it now. You have not fenced them out. You have fenced some of them in with the plant. So if the shells were not for slugs, what were they for? Two things, and both of them are real. The first was the chickens. Shells went back to the hens, dried and crushed fine, because a laying hen needs a great deal of calcium to make a shell, and the cheapest calcium on a farm was the shells she had already made. That loop is the tidiest thing in the whole business. The hen makes a shell, the family eats the egg, the shell goes back to the hen, and she makes another one. The second was the compost heap. Eggshell is nearly all calcium carbonate, which is the same compound as agricultural lime, and it does slowly sweeten acidic soil and add calcium as it breaks down. But be honest about the time scale, because this is where people get oversold. A shell tossed on the ground in big pieces will still be recognizable in 2 years. To get any real speed out of it, it has to be dried and then ground to a fine powder near enough to flour, and even then it is a slow, gentle amendment rather than a fix for anything urgent. So they were a feed supplement and a soil amendment. Somewhere along the line, somebody noticed they were sharp, and a myth was born that has outlived everybody who started it. And it is worth knowing why a farm had shells in that quantity in the first place, because it explains the tin on the stove. Farm flock was not a few hens in a run, it was 30 or 40 birds, and in the season they were laying 3 or 4 dozen eggs a day, and a good part of that went to town. Eggs sold for something like 50 or 60 cents a dozen at the farm gate in the middle of the 1950s, and that egg money was often the one bit of income in that house that came in weekly rather than once a year at harvest. So shells were not scraps, they were the byproduct of a working business. They arrived in real volume every single day, and a household that produced that much of anything found a use for it. That is the whole reason there was a system for them at all. I settled this in my own garden with a flashlight, and I would recommend it to anybody. I had put a proper ring of crushed shell around 6 hostas, not a token sprinkle, a real barrier, and I felt good about it. In the daytime, there was not a slug in sight anywhere in that bed, and I took that as proof. Then one night in June, I went out at about 10:30 with a light. I counted more than 40 slugs in that one bed, on the leaves, on the stems, on the soil, and several of them sitting inside my rings on top of the shells. I had walked past that bed every day for a month and seen nothing, because everything I was trying to fight was asleep somewhere dark while I was out there looking. Same bed, same night, 12 hours apart. That is the entire lesson. That is the number to carry out of this, not a product. 40 slugs in a bed I had believed was clean, and 40 was not the population. That is the part that took me a while to accept. The slugs on the surface on any given night are a minority of what is in that soil. The rest are down in it, in the cracks and under the roots, along with the eggs, and they come up in shifts depending on the weather. So when somebody tells you they collected 100 slugs and still had damage, that is not a failure of the method. That is what the arithmetic actually looks like. If this is already making you want to go out with a light tonight, do me a favor. Hit that like button, subscribe, and turn the notification bell on while you are there. I put out one of these every week, the old practical knowledge that worked for 100 years and got quietly replaced with something you have to buy. The bell is the only way these reach you. Then stay right here, because the next part is where the problem actually lives. Here is the second part, and it is the thing that decides whether you have slugs or not. A slug problem is not a slug problem, it is a moisture and shelter problem. Slugs are almost entirely water. They have no shell and no waterproof skin, so a dry, sunny afternoon will kill one outright. Everything about how they live comes out of that single vulnerability. They are nocturnal because the night is damp. They hide in the day because daylight and dry air are lethal, and they need somewhere cool and moist to spend those hours, or they simply cannot exist in your garden at all. That gives you two handles that no barrier ever will. The first is shelter, and it is under everything. Boards, bricks, pots, the rim of a raised bed, thick mulch right up against a stem, at a heap of last year's leaves against the fence, long grass along the edge, an upturned tray you meant to move in April. Every one of those is a slug hotel, and the slugs eating your plants at midnight or sleeping 4 feet away at noon. The second is water, and this one is the single most useful sentence in this video. Water in the morning, not the evening. Almost everybody waters after supper because it is cool and it feels sensible and the water does not evaporate. And what you have done is soak the ground at exactly the hour the slugs come out and hand them a wet, warm night to work in. Water first thing instead, and the surface has all day to dry, and by the time they come out, the top of that soil is unfriendly. That change on its own does more than every barrier product on the shelf put together, and it costs nothing but the time you do it. And water the soil, not the plant, and water deeply and less often. A garden that is damp everywhere all the time is a garden that belongs to slugs. Now let me tell you about the money. Nobody sells eggshells, and that is exactly why the myth spread so freely. There is no company with an interest in correcting it and nothing to gain from testing it, so it just travels from garden to garden, getting repeated by well-meaning people forever. But look at the aisle that grew up around the same idea. There is copper tape, and there are wool pellets, and there are grit granules, and there are various rings and collars and gels, all of them selling the same promise, which is that you can draw a line the slug will not cross. That premise is what people are buying. Some of those products have a small effect in some conditions. None of them does what the packaging implies. And underneath it sits the bigger seller, which is bait, and we will come to why that one matters in a minute. I am not telling you there is a room somewhere where men decided this. There is not. What happened is simpler and worse. It is a quiet agreement among everybody who profits to sell you a line on the ground rather than a habit, because a habit has no price. Nobody has to coordinate, and nobody has to lie. A barrier is an easy thing to photograph on a package, and going out at night with a torch is not, and so the shelf fills up with barriers. It has been that way for 50 years. If that landed, hit like and subscribe, and ring that bell. Now here is the third part, which is what your grandfather actually did. He trapped them, and he collected them, and he used the animal's own biology against it. Here is the method, and it is almost embarrassingly simple. Lay a plank of wood flat on the soil, in the bed. An old board, a roof slate, a piece of scrap timber, a cabbage leaf if you have nothing else. Put it down in the evening. Every slug in that area spends the night feeding and then, before daylight, goes looking for the nearest cool, dark, damp place to sleep. You have just built them the best one available. In the morning, you tip the board over, and they are all sitting there in a group, and you deal with them in one go and put the board back down for tonight. That is it. That is the whole technique. 4 minutes with a cup of coffee in your hand, and it works precisely because it does not fight the animal. You are not trying to convince a slug not to come. You are letting it come, letting it do what it was always going to do at dawn, and being there when it does. The other half of that farm was ducks. Ducks eat slugs enthusiastically all day without doing the damage to a garden that chickens do, and if you have the space and the inclination for poultry, they are the closest thing to a permanent answer that exists. Runner ducks in particular are famous for it. And the night walk. On a warm, damp evening after rain, an hour after dark, with a flashlight and a tub. That is when the population is above ground and visible and catchable, and one good session in early spring before they breed is worth 10 in August. Timing matters more than effort here. Slugs lay eggs in clusters in the soil, and a slug you remove in April is a slug that never produced 100 more in June. Now the warnings, and the first one is the most important thing in this video. Metaldehyde slug pellets are lethal to dogs. This is the big one. Those blue pellets have been a leading cause of dog poisoning for decades. They are attractive to dogs, and a small amount will kill one. It has been banned or withdrawn in a number of places for exactly that reason, but there is old stock in a great many sheds and garages in this country. If you have a bag of blue pellets in your shed and you have a dog or a grandchild, get rid of that bag properly through your household hazardous waste. Do not use it up. If you are going to use bait at all, the ones based on iron phosphate are far safer around pets and wildlife, and they work perfectly well. Read the box, and it will say plainly which one you are holding. Second, do not use salt. It kills the slug by drawing the water out of it, which is a genuinely cruel way to go, and every grain you scatter stays in your soil, and salt in soil is very hard to undo. Nothing about that is worth it. Third, on beer traps. They do work, but they only draw slugs from a small radius, and they will also drown ground beetles, which are one of the main things eating slugs and slug eggs for you at night. If you use them, sink them so the rim sits about an inch above the soil, which lets the beetles walk past. Fourth, and this one almost nobody knows, wash your hands after handling slugs and wash produce from a slug-heavy garden. Slugs and snails can carry a parasite called rat lungworm, which is rare and serious, and the sensible precautions are simply hand washing and rinsing your greens. Wear gloves if you are collecting by hand. Do not let children handle them, and never let anybody swallow one on a dare, which is exactly how the well-known cases happened. And a plain one. Leave a rough corner and a board or two for the ground beetles and the toads, because those are the things working the night shift on your side. So here is exactly what to do starting tonight. Go out an hour after dark with a flashlight, and look. Do not skip this. You need to see the actual population before any of the rest makes sense. Move your watering to the morning, today. That is the biggest single change on this list. Walk the beds and take away the shelter. Move the boards you are not using. Pull the mulch back a couple of inches from the stems. Cut the long grass at the edges. And turn over the pots that have been sitting there since spring. Then put back exactly 2 or 3 boards deliberately as traps. Check them every morning with your coffee. Do a proper night collection in early spring when the population is small, and another after any warm, wet spell. And if you have shells, dry them, crush them fine, and put them in the compost, or feed them back to hens if you keep any. That is where they were always going. One more thing, because it is the part I actually remember. Nothing left that kitchen. The shells went in the tin went to the hens or the heap, the peelings went to the hogs, and the water off the vegetables went out on the garden. Every single thing that came into that house left it through something else, and the garden was never really a separate place from the kitchen. It was one end of the same operation. What the hens ate came partly out of that garden, and what the garden grew came partly out of those hens, and the person walking the rows at dawn was the same person who had cracked the eggs at breakfast. Nobody thought of any of it as gardening. It was just the round of the day, and I think that is why the eggshell story survived so well. It sounds exactly like the kind of thing they would have done, because it is the kind of thing they did constantly, and so nobody ever thought to check it. The myth fits the shape of the truth. If you have gotten this far with me, hit like, subscribe, and turn on that bell. Nobody sponsors a video that says the answer is a plank of wood and getting up earlier, so the only thing keeping this in front of people is you. But he was never out there building little fences. He was out there at 5:30 in the morning with a cup in one hand, flipping a board over with his boot. I asked him once what he did about slugs. He said he did not do anything about slugs. He said he just knew where they slept. You did not forget this. Nobody taught you, and then you forgot. It was taken from you one product at a time until you were standing in a garden center holding a bag of granules for a problem that a board and a flashlight solved better, and nobody had ever once told you to go out and look at your own garden after dark. So do one thing tonight. Take a flashlight out an hour after sunset and count what you find. Then tell me in the comments what the number was, what county you are in, and what your family did about slugs, because I read every one, and those stories are the reason I keep recording. And if this rang true to you, come back for the next one, because I am going to show you how she kept a crock of eggs good from spring right through to Christmas with no cold at all, using one thing that cost 30 cents at the general store and is still sold today. Nobody teaches it. I will. Keep it simple, keep it yours, and remember, the people who